All sentient life have their core genetics. And layered on top of that, there's stuff that our environment creates. They call epigenetics that can still get passed forward through generations, right? Monarch butterflies, in their core genetics, know they got to go on a migration. But environmental stimulus tells them exactly when and where, and they do it across generations with multiple stops and metamorphoses, and it's not learned behavior, it's kind of built right in. Sea turtles know, go out to sea, don't go upland when they come crawling out of the sand after they hatch. Science stuff. I'm happy to share a PowerPoint if anyone wants it. And this also happens to humans, including with trauma. So like if this is the human brain, and this is our kind of lizard brain, fight, flight, freeze, wrapped around it your wise owl, the prefrontal cortex, the newest part of the human brain that says, I should really study for my final exam. And when there is a threat stimulus, this goes offline and you're back to fight, flight, freeze. Right? So you're cruising down the road, deer jumps in front of the car, this goes offline, you slam on the brakes, it saves your life. Right? Someone comes after you in a threatening way, this goes offline, run. So you need it to be able to do that, to have the flexibility to do that. But now we know, like with lived trauma, if this goes offline with trauma experiences, they say 5 adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and this gets replumbed on a hair trigger. And what that means is that we become either emotionally reactive or emotionally unreactive. A little bit of stress is good. That's the kind that says, I'm going to get up and get ready for the day. Some periods of higher stress are tolerable, the kind that says, I'm going to grind this out and finish out college. But too much stress or trauma, and it hurts us. So here's how that one looks. Yeah. Positive, a little bit. Tolerable, some. Toxic, too much. And so you either get hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Here's how it shows up. Somebody goes through these adverse childhood experiences, and someone says, hey, Johnny, come on in. It's time to take your test today. What you coming at me like that for? Throw the chair. That's hyperarousal. Angry, agitated, emotionally reactive. And the exact opposite can happen, right? So that's the fight response. The exact opposite is hypoarousal. And that's, hey, Johnny, come on in. It's time to take your test. Huh? And the same person can ping pong between those two behaviors, from zing to whoa. In fact, like Gabor Mate, whose work I really, really appreciate, has drawn a link in his research to ADHD and trauma. That really what ADHD is a trauma response. It's hyperarousal, zing, that's a period of hyperfocus or something. Zoned right in on that video game. And then spaced out, zoned out, disengaged, easily distracted. What we've learned is it does not have to be your trauma. It can be that of a parent or a grandparent or a great-grandparent. It's really hard to study trauma in humans because you can't take 2 groups of people and subject one to trauma. That's not ethical, right? So the studies in humans are studies of twins separated at birth, raised in different environments. And there are some really good twin studies that have enough people where it actually tells us something meaningful. But both twins are usually separated from birth mother before they go into these environments. There's already both experiencing some measure of trauma. It's hard to study in humans. They study it a lot in like rats and mice. So you take a rat, you put an electrode into the pain center of the rat's brain and you give it a pain stimulus, when you introduce the smell of apple blossoms, and that rat will be terrified of apple blossoms for the rest of its life. But the children of that rat with no pain stimulus will also be scared of the smell of apple blossoms, as well their grandchildren. It's not genetic, otherwise all rats would always be scared of apple blossoms. It's epigenetic. It comes from an environmental stimulus, but still gets passed forward through generations. And that's what happens, what people mean by historical trauma and stuff like that. It warrants much more further study. But here are a couple of things. One is, we don't know how far forward it goes. It seems to start abating after some generations. It might actually be around the 7-generation mark. A little bit less with each successive generation. But we need to study that more to be able to say more definitively. Also, it's raising questions like, what environmental stimuli have caused this? Like if you think about Native people in the 1800s being chased around by soldiers with blue uniforms and guns, and now we police them with people who wear blue uniforms and guns. And then they show up emotionally reactive in a routine traffic stop instead of calmly responsive, and we say, how come they're doing it? It's all their fault. Would it make a difference if we had different colored uniforms or anything else? Those are questions that are probably good to ask. We don't even know the answers yet. And also, it's not just the bad stuff that gets passed forward over time. The good stuff does too. We're not just the inheritors of all the crap that happened at residential boarding schools and genocide policies and all that kind of stuff. We are the inheritors of all the good stuff from the people who figured out how to collaborate, how to build things, how to stay warm, how to build snowshoes and walk on top of all this stuff out there so they could stay alive. And those things we can, with intention, keep passing forward to enhance physical, community, and relational health. So we can do something. We can't erase the bad things that happen, but we can build new and inundate one another with many more positive, healthy things that can also be passed forward over time. Gabor Mate said something else really interesting. Addiction is also highly correlated with substance abuse, or with trauma. And so a lot of people who have been dealing with addiction are dealing with a trauma experience in their own lived life or that of a parent or grandparent, almost without exception. There probably are some. And so when someone has had a trauma experience or has inherited the trauma imprint from a parent or grandparent, their safety was greatly compromised by the trauma, and they're desperately seeking safety. And so tending to safety is one of the important things for helping someone navigate addiction. And safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection. Safety is not the absence of threat, but the presence of connection. As an example, someone with an alcohol addiction can recover and manage well enough to walk into a bar and order a burger without falling off the wagon, if they have healthy connection. That connection could be to their higher power, to their friend who's walking in there with them, to their spouse back at home, to their kids, to their community, to their ceremony, to their language, or anything. The more healthy connections you have, the greater our ability to mitigate the pull of addiction. This is another reason why language revitalization and cultural revitalization pays health dividends. So what would healthy connection look like? And it can look like a lot of things.